Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. I want to start with a question. Do you have any people in your life who you feel like are sort of like conflict connoisseurs? Like they're into it. They're kind of the pot stirrers of conflict, where if you're upset, instead of sort of talking you off the ledge, they're the friend who's like, yeah, you should be pissed. And that's right. You're the right one in this. Anyway, that if you're nodding your head, yes, that we know people, high conflict lovers, and especially if you're an HFC, a high functioning codependent, you're most likely not a high conflict lover. I would say as HFCs, even in recovery, we're not into stirring the pot that much. So it can be really stressful when you have someone in your life who is like that. So that's all we're talking about in today's episode is high conflict versus healthy conflict, right? Because we can't be so conflict avoidant that we never deal with it. So I'm going to give you a bunch of steps that you can take to get better at conflict, but also really this is about understanding when you are in relationship with high conflict people and how you can protect yourself. But before we get started, if you happen to be new to this YouTube channel, please introduce yourself in the comments, say hello, make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that every time I roll out something new, which is every Tuesday and every Thursday, you won't miss a thing, seeing as how I make it all for you. I want to say thank you so much for your questions and your comments that you're leaving me. You know that I read them all. And this one is from CatRest982 under the video Reflections on Aging Well, Beauty, Health, Societal Standards, and More. Good morning, Terri. It's Sunday morning, and it's a pleasure to watch you. I adore your content and always waiting for new inspirational videos. Have a great rest of your day, Kat. Well, Kat, thank you so much for taking the time to actually just stop your Sunday to come on in and say hello. I absolutely appreciate that. So why don't we move it on into today's episode, shall we? I think we shall. All right, the actual content of today was inspired by, I was listening to We Can Do Hard Things with Glennon Doyle, Abby, and Amanda, and they were interviewing a woman named Amanda Ripley, who wrote a book about high conflict, and it's basically how we get trapped and how to get out when you're in these high conflict. Because if you look at the world that we're in, there is so much polarization and there is so much high conflict out there. But Amanda Ripley is talking about the out there and the in here, because most people were seeking to create peace in our relationships. She was actually telling a story that, she helps people who live in war zones, right, figure out conflict. And she's like, and those people are just like the people who I help in Ohio or New York, who what they really want is less conflict in their relationships in their life. They want help at home. They want help with their partner or their children. So I really do think it all starts close and then sort of ripples out. So let's talk a little bit about conflict. Like, how does high conflict differ from regular conflict? High conflict is where you get to people get to a certain point of their own righteousness. It's very much like the political landscape in the United States right now, and has been probably, especially for the last, I'd say, 4 years more, where people just have their heels dug in. When you're in high conflict, you're making negative assumptions about the people who have a different position than you and believe that only you know the right thing. So that type of conflict with high conflict, there's really no winners, right? Because nobody is trying to understand anybody. It's just wanting to crush their opponent, basically. Another thing that to really think about is that every high conflict situation has some kind of a real story. What's the story behind the public story? The real reason the conflict has escalated to this point may not have to do with what it looks like. There's more to the story than meets the eye, usually with high conflict situations. And then Amanda talks in the book about an effective way of getting into dialogue when you are in conflict. And she has a technique that she calls looping that reminds me quite a bit of Harville and Helen Hendrix's Imago therapy scripts for communication. There's a similarity, but looping is an effective way to actively listen during high conflict situations. So what does this mean? This is like a form of sort of paraphrasing. The other person is talking and you're sort of paraphrasing back, like, if I heard you right, or what I hear you saying is. It also, when we're looping or doing the imago therapy technique, it serves to slow down the conversation. And when you think about how things escalate, everything gets faster. So one really important thing that looping does is it makes things get more slow, because it's from a place where we are not so activated that we'll be able to become curious. Because this is part of the most important aspect of conflict resolution in a real way, especially when you're in high conflict, is trying to understand, having some curiosity, right? But when you're outraged, when you're so pissed off, there's no way you can be curious at the same time. Amanda's point in the book is that one of the biggest distinguishing factors between high conflict and healthy conflict is that in healthy conflict, curiosity exists. We're trying to get somewhere. We're trying to solve something. We're trying to get through it in a way together. There's motivation to do that. And I think when we're looking at high conflict situations, people are way past. There's not motivation to try to understand the other people's point of view. And I've also seen a lot in my therapy practice that there's very selective perception when you've been wronged. And it's like with healthy conflict, you don't have like the hero and the villain. With high conflict, you have heroes and villains. And of course, whichever side you're on, those are the heroes and the other people are the villains. And so, again, there's got to be some kind of desire to collaborate in some way, right? If you're going to effectively solve conflict, effectively do something, change something when people get polarized and stuck. Another important aspect of high conflict is that there's players, right? And then I'm going to get into like how do you overcome it and different things that we can do. But we want to be really aware of who are the players in our lives. And in this interview, Amanda was saying that when she was a journalist at the New York Times, she had someone who she worked with, and this is someone that she would deem a conflict entrepreneur. So that's people who kind of are gleeful when there's conflict. They a little bit get off on conflict. So this woman would come into her office and say, "Oh, I heard they killed your story," meaning Amanda was working on a story and now they're not going to run her story. And she was like, "Yeah, I heard." And she'd be like bummed out. And then the coworker would say, "Do you think it's because you're a woman?" Like sticking the needle in, twisting it, being like, you should be more outraged at this. You should be more outraged than you are. And what Amanda said is that it didn't make her feel better, right? When that person would leave her office, she most of the time felt worse. Like, should I be more outraged? Should I be complaining to something? Like, you know what I mean? So think about in your life, do you have conflict entrepreneurs, people who are into, like, they're kind of into it. I had a friend who used to always say, she'd call me up and be like, "Oh my God, I heard the most horrible story. I have to tell you." And I'm like, "You really don't, actually. In fact, you actually do not have to tell me that. I don't need to know that. I've lived fine up until this point." But again, there's something, some people are really drawn to this dramatic stuff. It does something for them. And I'm not sure, I can't even get into the psychology of that, because really, let's just stay on our side of the street, which is figuring out how to deal with high conflict situations and high conflict individuals. I think distancing from high conflict individuals can be really helpful and is appropriate. You know, you have to notice, like, who kind of is delighted by every twist and turn of the conflict and is like looking to keep it going, right? Who's profiting from the conflict? Who's attention seeking? Like someone who's gossiping or talking about something terrible, especially if it's a conflict. That's attention seeking behavior on their part, right? Who's fueled by the hostility or the contempt or the disgust, that, those are the kinds of emotions that when you're really in this stalemate of conflict, when people have just dug in, So anyway, we don't want to have a lot of conflict entrepreneurs around us or even in our social media feed, right? We really want to just protect ourselves. In the book, she also talks about one of the traits that conflict entrepreneurs employ constantly is humiliation, right? Of tearing someone down in a public way. So this perpetuates kind of this endless cycle of high conflict, because then the person who feels humiliated, a lot of times, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, wants to go back at the other person. And now you have revenge. And there's this great quote that Amanda quotes in the book that Nelson Mandela once said, "There's nobody more dangerous than one who's been humiliated, even when you humiliate him rightly." Meaning, right, even if they did something and they deserve sort of the humiliation that came their way about it, there's no people that are more dangerous than that. All right, so what can we do if we are looking to have a deeper understanding and we would like to make the distinction between high conflict and healthy conflict? When you're in conflict, you have to uncover what is underneath the top story, right? So we've sort of got the headline, but that's not really the story. So really start to unpack and look at what has gotten people so invested in this. Second thing is we really want to, as I said before, but this is going to be one of the things that you can do to minimize it in your life, is, you don't really need a bunch of people in your life who are blowing up things, who are getting off on this, right? If some people are really addicted and get off on the fight of it all, but you're not one of them, you might want to just distance yourself from those people. Another thing is we want to slow it down, right? When you're in high conflict or feel like you might be, you want to slow down the process, right? We want space between our thoughts and our actions, right? So we want to know when we get activated by something, and we want to set ourselves up to succeed. And the way that you can do that is by slowing everything down. I also think that it's important that this whole black and white thinking doesn't work. We have to reduce that all right, all wrong thinking, because in real life, we know life is not black and white. It's very gray. And so when you're in conflict with someone, can you try to see what you have in common? Can you try to see where, perhaps, even though you're in conflict, you both have the same goal, whether this is in your relationship or whether it's someone that you're working with? Like, try to find commonalities so that you're doing it with more nuance, right? We're looking at the situation with more nuance, because life really isn't as simple. As much as we would love it to only be heroes and villains, it actually isn't. And you also want to be mindful of the story that you're telling, right? Again, we're moving away from the two-dimensional hero and victim, hero and villain story, and moving into being able to write out the nuances of what really went on, and then getting really good with your communication. So in the show notes, which is terricole.com/guide, we'll give you some of the steps for looping, but also I will give you some resources for the Imago therapy scripts, because I think they're all really great. It can help you out no matter what situation you find yourself in. Being better at being able to express yourself is helpful no matter what. So if we're moving into the looping, so the way that Amanda Ripley talks about it, it's really simple paraphrasing. The person is saying what they're saying, and you are mirroring back, not just their words, because I want you to think about, what are we really doing when we mirror back to someone what they've said to us? We are showing them that we're invested in understanding. Sometimes the relief when you're in a high conflict situation, there is so much of that pressure that can be released simply from the feeling that the other person is at least friggin' trying to understand you. And even if you're not getting it perfectly right, by doing the looping or by doing the imago, repeating back, did I get this right? And basically repeating back to them what you heard them say, you're summarizing what they said and then basically just asking if you got it right. It sounds really simple, but it is so powerful, you guys. If you have not tried this, it's really important. And then we have to let the other person let us know, right, if we got it right or if we didn't, or if there's more to say, right? We really do want to get it right. And we can only know that we did if the person confirms that we got it right. So whenever you have a misunderstanding with someone that needs clarification, you can use this technique. If there's something that you're confused about, that the person's talking about and you're in an argument, it's okay to say, please tell me more about that. I think this is what you're saying. Am I right? Because again, sometimes we're not even having the same fight with people because there is so much else going on. And I think that you want to, be aware of where your own body language comes into it. And so you want to be aware not to be taking an aggressive stance if you're not trying to be aggressive, but you don't want your body betraying you and sort of looking like you're being aggressive. Really keeping calm. I'll also give you in the guide some questions, right, where when you find yourself in high conflict situations, questions that you can ask that really give you clarity about what does and does not need to be said, and does it or does it not need to be said by you. When you think about high conflict and healthy conflict, when we're actually building community, it's okay to have healthy conflict. I don't think we can be healthy in our lives and never have conflict, right? I don't think it's something we can avoid it forever. I just don't. It doesn't seem to, it's not possible, because if you are avoiding it forever, you're just conflict avoidant, right? Which means you're not problem solving, and you want to be. And in healthy relationships, you have the ability to just get clear about how you feel. But it requires a certain amount of curiosity and respect for the other person. And we have to have some rules of engagement. And as you guys know, if you know my work, in all of my communities, I have very specific rules of engagement so that nobody's trampling on anybody else. And again, it's okay for people to have some conflict, but we have to behave in a respectable way. And we have to allow people to make their own decisions. So in all of my groups, and actually I have the Terri Cole membership. You guys have been asking me to do it for years. So it's a membership where you meet with me every single week. It's very high touch, more so than anything else I've ever done, really. You're going to get coaching from me every week. And then we have another coach on my team who's also doing a monthly call when people have questions. It's going to be amazing. So if you're interested in it, you just want to go to terricole.com/TCM, which is just Terri Cole membership, and you will see all the information. But, listen, if you like my style, if you like hanging out with me, then imagine that there's a lot of like-hearted, like-minded people who are in this membership, and I would love for you guys to be one of them. So check it out, terricole.com/TCM for the Terri Cole membership. Not very fancy, but it is what it is. I hope that you enjoyed this episode on high conflict versus healthy conflict. And I'll give you all the, in the show notes, we'll give you a link to Amanda Ripley's book as well. I hope you guys have the most amazing week. And as always, take care of you.